Hello and welcome to Roast 65. Hi Sam, happy Friday to
Hello,
you.
Mal. We were joking before recording that it's normally me that opens with hello. So it's over to Mal today. Mal, today we've got an interesting bunch of profiles. We've got a Middle Eastern MBB consultant who's wondering if 3.5 years of work experience is too little,
Hmm.
too early for a top MBA. And he's got a 3.36 GPA, which is a little bit on the low side, and he's wondering whether that's going to shoot him down. We'll see. We've got an engineer who does motor racing, who wants to use a leadership
Okay.
development program to break into management consulting, and he wants M7, but that's a pretty common background. So we'll talk whether his case is realistic or not. We've got an investment advisor who wants to break into consulting. We hear this a lot, but it sounds like this guy actually does want to go into consulting. He doesn't just kind of drinking the MBB Kool-Aid. And so we'll talk about how to make that pivot. We've got somebody who wants to pivot from commercial real estate in the US to Europe because he says that's a broader and more sophisticated real estate market. As somebody based in Europe, we'll talk about whether that's the story that schools want to hear. And the bonus is we've come across a quite unique way of calculating the financial costs of an MBA that's doing the rounds on Reddit at the moment. And so I want to wade into that argument and add a few points.
Okay.
Amazing.
Shall we dive into profile one then, Sam?
Let's get into it. Firstly, formatting's revolting. Oh my God. I'm just going to verbal diarrhea this.
Two master's degree kind of a show off, but I like it.
Strongest profiles we've seen this year.
How taming iguanas and lizards taught me about cross-functional management.
Yeah, Obi, this isn't LinkedIn. This is Reddit. Come on. All right. Profile one. Hi everyone, would really appreciate an honest profile review, particularly for HBS, Stanford GSB, and Wharton. So the big three is there. Background, Middle Eastern, currently working in Saudi Arabia, applying in round two for fall 27, will have 3 years of 4 months of full-time experience at matriculation. Work experience, MBB in the Middle East, mostly worked on major public sector engagements and a few commercial due diligences across sectors. Before university and or during university, OP also spent several years working at one of their family's hotels. Was at 18, was given the responsibility for managing the property and a team of 7 to 8 employees. And this hotel achieved the highest utilization amongst the family's properties during his time there. Education, studied in Saudi Arabia, industrial engineering with a GPA of 3.36, has passed CFA level 2, is the CFA Research Challenge runner-up, and has not taken the GMAT yet, but is targeting a 710. Leadership and extracurriculars, founded a university public speaking leadership club that grew to 100 members, mentored 20 new joiners at MBB, and has additional leadership experience managing a small team at a young age. Recommenders are a partner and a senior engagement manager. Both know them well. Post MBA and long-term goals is to move into private equity or private capital post MBA, gain experience in the US, and eventually return to the Middle East. Story in there as well, creating impact through investing in people and institutions. A lot of questions, but first I want to get your read on this profile.
Okay, let's go from right at the top then. Let's talk about academics first. Here, education. So, look, a 3.36 GPA is not a great start for HBS, Stanford, and Wharton. Those tend to have a GPA average of about 3.6 or thereabouts, so a little bit below. But the brand of the university helps. I assume that is King Fahd University, which is the probably most renowned university in Saudi for engineering. So the brand of the university definitely will help. CFA level 2 will help a little bit as well. But the GMAT is pending. And, I've seen a lot of people targeting 715. How many of them actually make it? We'll see. So a little bit of a like cautiously wary on that on the GMAT, but the rest of the education reasonable. In terms of professional, MBB is obviously nice, and I think we know from lower down that it's BCG of the MBBs. So not
Mm.
McKinsey, not Bain, but BCG. Um, which is nice. It also sounds like there's going to be some good recommenders in there as well. One of the advantages of coming at this process, at the MBA application process from an MBB, is that your recommenders typically have done the recommendation process before. They know what schools are looking for, and they're not, surprised when it comes up. And it looks like a partner and a senior engagement manager. It's quite a nice spread of people above the applicant as well. So LORs looks nice as part of the professional piece. The other bit that's interesting about this profile is the family business. Now, OP really frames it from a leadership perspective, talks about like, managing the employees, etc. up here. But the schools are going to see this from a slightly different perspective. Yes, the leadership helps, but what they're going to see is, oh, you've got a family business. So, and it sounds like quite a big hotel chain. So you're not poor. We're not going to need to give you scholarship money. And you're not going to be unemployed realistically after the MBA either, because you can just go to the family business. And so as an applicant, you can lean into that and make sure you make that clear as an alternative goal in your applications. And so actually, though, that part of the application, that part of the profile is really quite nice. So from a professional perspective, great. Demographic. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but 3 years, 4 months is slightly on the low side in terms of work experience. But speaking more broadly, the Middle Eastern group is relatively underrepresented in MBA applications. And so, yeah, we can talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But I would just generally say URM at this point, underrepresented at this point. Extracurriculars. Now, look, everybody has extracurriculars from undergrad. I talk about this all the time. Literally everybody, or vast majority of people, do something extracurricular in undergrad. So those very rarely stand out. But what is interesting is the mentorship of the new joiners at MBB. If that's a sort of formal mentorship title that you've put yourself forward for, been selected for, that is a really nice extracurricular that could be really useful for your leadership stories. So small positive on the ECs. The goals. Now, I don't like these goals. We can talk about it more if we need to later, but basically, for reasons I've outlined at length in other episodes of Reddit Roast, private capital, private equity is not a nice post-MBA goal. There's a lot of people say they want to move into PE, particularly people coming from very structured, finance-heavy industries like consulting and investment banking. But I'm afraid that private equity is a very nepotistic industry. They don't have massive scale. They don't have these established programs typically to hire people straight out of business school. So what they tend to do is hire personal connections, people they've worked with. So this works if you've already got your in a PE firm. But if you're banking on the business school opening this door for you, this is not a good goal post MBA. So wary on that. The good news is it can be changed, it can be adjusted, but definitely not not ideal. So overall, a decent profile, really kind of defined by the MBB plus family business professional narrative, GMAT pending. I don't want to make too strong a conclusion before we get the GMAT.
Okay. And I'd like to get into OP's questions now. The first is 3 years and 4 months of work experience at matriculation too early for HSW, especially Stanford?
No, look, it's okay. So this is the 3 years, 4 months here. So average of these programs is like 4 or 5 years, 4.5, say. So OP is what? Basically a year below the average. The school's perspective, they want to retain this average more or less. They want to keep the class average at about 4 or 5 years. So all they need to do when they see somebody with 3.5 years, particularly 3.5 years of good work experience, right? McKinsey, Bain, BCG, that is not a walk in the park. So when they see somebody with 3.5 years of solid work experience like that, all they're thinking is to keep our average at 4.5, we just need to bring someone in who's got 6 years of experience. And there's thousands of people with 6 years of experience applying. So they're not worried about it. That's not difficult. The bigger question is, have you got the credentials, even though you've only got 3.5 years of experience? And I would argue that with BCG plus the leadership with the hotel, yes, absolutely have that experience in spades. So I'm not worried about the work experience at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, Question two then, how damaging is the 3.36 GPA given the industrial engineering plus the CFA plus hopefully a strong GMAT?
It is a bit damaging, be blunt. It's not the strength of this profile at all. But it is offset, as I said before, by the school brand. It is offset by the CFA level 2. It's not really offset by industrial engineering because there's millions of industrial engineers and engineers more generally applying. So that doesn't really help. It does also, but it does say that it does tell me that the GMAT is going to be important. Yes. And I think the next question is, what would a GMAT score need to be competitive? So I'll just roll directly into that one. So look, the average at M7 and particularly HSW is about 385 or thereabouts. So normally with a GPA lower than that average, quite meaningfully below the 3.6 average, I'd like to see the GMAT to be higher than the average to offset it. Equivalent would be about a 715, a 705, as OP is targeting. However, I also mentioned before that the Middle East demographic tends to be underrepresented and have lower stats. It does tend to have lower stats than the average overall. So you don't need the GMAT to directly offset that GPA. It just needs to be solid. So I would say 685 plus is where I want OP's GMAT score to be.
Okay. All right. Next question. Does BCG plus the leadership experiences, do they compensate meaningfully for being younger?
Yes. As I mentioned before, particularly the hotel part. Again, OP's framing these as leadership experiences. It's not really it's the responsibility that hotel experience has brought. It's the formal training for 3 and a bit years at BCG that has grown you and developed you faster than somebody who's in maybe a slower industry. So yes, the short answer is it does compensate, and you are going to be okay with 3 and a bit years of work experience. That's not going to be the key issue. So yeah, I guess that's a repeat of the question above. I think that hopefully I've answered that.
Okay. And does the Saudi or the Middle Eastern pool in general change how this question is how would you evaluate the profile for that pool?
Yeah. So yes, basically the Saudi Middle Eastern demographic does tend to have lower stats, lower hard scores, so lower GMAT score, lower GRE score, lower GPA, and they still make up a decent proportion of the class. Now, the thing and that's just because they're underrepresented. They make a big part of the world economy, but a relatively small number of MBA applicants, and therefore the bar tends to be a little bit lower. I would argue the opposite is, for example, the Indian pool. There are a lot of Indian applicants. The school could fill the entire class with Indian applicants if they wanted to, but they don't. And therefore the bar for Indians is much, much higher. So that's sort of the opposite. Now, coming back to the Middle East and Saudi market, yes, the stats is one part of this, but the other part is the work experience, especially among consultants. There is a large pool, I would say that, I'll go as far as saying the majority, but a very big pool of consultants in the Middle East who are working at MBB, and they're doing basically natural resource consulting for state-owned enterprises. If the lion's share of your work has been Aramco and Ma'aden transformations, then there are lots of other Middle Eastern consultants who are going to have exactly the same story as you. However, if you have been in the Middle East involved in interesting, let's call them sectors, that aren't just natural resources, then you stand out versus the Saudi and Middle Eastern pool. Ditto, if you're a woman with great work experience in that market, you stand out in that pool. So yes, it's about slightly lower stats, but there's also nuance about what work experience you've done and demographic to whether or not you would stand out in that group.
Okay. OP's next question then is, which of the three, HBS, GSB, and Wharton, do you think is the strongest fit?
Yeah, this is a very easy question, and I'm afraid I'm going to pee in OP's fire a little bit here. I know he's hoping, or she's hoping, I'm going to say Stanford, but the fact is Harvard and Stanford have the lowest percentage of consultants, of management consultants in their classes of all the MBA, of all the M7 MBAs. We're talking sub 20%. In contrast, Wharton has over 30% management consultants in the class and a massive cohort, especially compared to Stanford. So I'm afraid Wharton by far the biggest, the highest chance here and the best fit, and Stanford by far the lowest.
Okay. And OP's last question then, would you apply this cycle or would you wait another year and apply with 4+ years of experience?
I don't see much benefit to waiting here. The only potential argument is if you need that extra year to get your GMAT score up. As I mentioned earlier, the GMAT is going to be a big factor here. I was talking about this here. It would be a big factor to offset the relatively low GPA. And so if you need to wait an extra year to get the GMAT up, fine, do it. But if you get the GMAT in round 2 this year, within round 2 this year, and that's 705 or even just starts with a 7, then fantastic, crack on, apply in round 2, get on with it. I don't see much benefit to waiting if the GMAT scores where it needs to be.
All right, that's all of OP's questions. Are we ready to go to our next profile?
Yup, let's do it.
Okay, profile 2. 23 male Indian mechanical engineer. Work experience, 3 years, not including internships. 3 years at an engineering company in manufacturing in a niche field in Texas. Started out as a design engineer and have since moved into a PM role. Company's operations are project-based. I handle 700K projects every month. 2 internships in the automotive industry in operations roles. Extracurriculars, participated in the university film club, eventually became president of the club, organized some events, did some acting in short films, and managed collabs with Apple TV and Paramount. Motorsport is one of my hobbies. I do sim racing and real life track days. I have a virtual racing team as well. I do a lot of hiking and traveling, and I'm looking forward to the university expedition programs. Undergraduate, 3.83 GPA in mechanical engineering from a state school in the US. Took graduate level classes in college because I could. GMAT score 705. Well done. MBA goal, I want to eventually get into general management and I don't want to spend years trying to get into a real managerial job. An MBA will help me get into LDPs that will get me to those positions, ideally in an engineering or engineering adjacent company, so I can use my engineering and business knowledge together. Would be willing to pivot into tech. Target schools, Booth, Sloan, Tuck, and Ross. Now, what's your take on this profile, Sam?
Yeah, I like this. I like this applicant's given us all the right information. It's a good, a nice profile to roast. So academic, solid, very, very good start. 3.83 GPA in mechanical engineering. Okay, it's from a state school. They're not talking top tier of school here, but definitely a decent academic profile. Mechanical engineering, yes, there's a lot of engineers. On the other hand, it does say smart. So I think decent undergrad for sure. And then a 705 GMAT score is great. It really, really is. That is something to hats off to OP, particularly that 90 quant. That's really nice. So academically, great start. Right, professional. The obviously falling into the engineering pool here, except that OP's experience is sounds like is more project management related, which is interesting to differentiate from the engineers a little bit. It also looks like you can quantify your role quite nicely. I work with a lot of people who, for example, management consultants who are so low in the pecking order, they don't really know the size of the project they're working on. They can't really quantify their own work. It sounds like OP is in a great position to quantify his role. So that's nice. It also looks like, I think, one promotion here. I think this move into a management project management role can be framed as a promotion, probably. So that's also quite nice. So decent professional experience, nothing crazy standout, but again, solid. Demographic. Indian engineer is probably the big weakness here. As I've talked about at length in these videos, there are a lot of Indian engineers, whether it's Indian engineers in India or Indian engineers who have emigrated or family have emigrated to other parts of the world. There's a lot of that demographic applying. In terms of work experience, I think this means 3 years experience now, which means 4 and a bit years of experience at matriculation, which is bang on the average. So that's nice. OP's right at the exact, nice point in his career to apply to MBAs. Extracurriculars. So as I always say, like undergrad extracurriculars, everyone has them. These look fairly decent, the collaborations with Apple TV and stuff, but I don't see OP's narrative really featuring media at all. So I'm not particularly, blown away by the ECs there. The ditto, the hiking and the traveling. Literally everybody at the moment seems to have traveling, and so many of them have hiking on their resumes. Again, that's not going to stand out at all. But this motorsport team, this is interesting. It's interesting because it's quite unique. Not everybody is into motorsport, especially not the in real life part. And having a racing team, albeit a virtual racing team that he is managing, there's a leadership component there. There's a community component there. Mentorship even maybe. So that is the extracurricular that's going to do most of the lifting. And I would go as far as saying as if you do apply to HBS, OP, no brainer. That motorsport needs to be on, or especially that virtual racing team needs to be a contender for your essay topic. Good. So that's extracurriculars. Goals. I really like these goals. OP's got his plan in place. One of the most realistic, credible goals we've seen in a long time. This is no giant pivot. This is just using an MBA for what almost it's designed for, which is pivoting into a management role in my industry via an LDP. I love this goal. Very, very good work, OP. You've nailed it. I would take a step further and say, you're talking about this willingness to pivot to tech. Probably the most widely well-regarded LDP at the moment is the Amazon Pathways program. Amazon obviously kind of on the cusp between tech and logistics. Also, just thought of this now, Amazon have Amazon Prime, which might even link into this TV experience somehow. Just a thought, consider Amazon's Pathways program in your goals. I think it would make a lot of sense. So overall, a solid engineering profile with well thought through goals. I like it.
Okay. A few questions then for you. What do you think OP's chances are at those target schools, which are Booth, Sloan, Tuck, and Ross?
Yeah, I like OP's chances for the bottom of the M7. The Booths, the Columbias, the MIT is probably the biggest stretch here, but sure, shoot your shot. You've earned it with the 705 and this profile. Give it a good shot. I would say, if I was a betting man, I would say Booth, and then maybe Tuck Ross with scholarships is where I would land.
And then I saw another point in OP's post that says he's been struggling to write an essay that makes him stand out. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, this is fairly common for engineers, to be honest, because it's not the sort of introspection required for this is not something you're trained to do at work in engineering. And I say this as an engineering undergrad, and I interned in a few engineering companies. Nobody cares about your introspection in an engineering company. So it's OP's not the first person to come across this. I had a bit of a thought earlier. I was preparing what a narrative might look like for OP to hopefully get you started in the right direction. Think of this as your framework for your career goals essays. For example, Columbia ask, what are your 3 to 5 year goals post MBA and why do you need Columbia? for example, to reach those. So basically, this is the career narrative and the career essays. I would suggest open with a story. Leaders tell stories. And so start the experience, start the essay with a story that shows your ability and your potential for management. It could be a dilemma that you faced as a manager on a project. It could be an achievement, something really specific that you want to point to that says, I'm cut out for management. With the realization then, part 2, I realized I want to work in a management role, not an individual contributor role. Project management is a good start, but there's a management role above me that I'm really targeting. My short-term goal is to pivot into a leadership development program at, for example, Amazon Pathways program. All right, name the specific companies. My longer-term goal is to enter management. Maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's a different company. I need an MBA to make that pivot. Specifically, off the top of my head, leadership training, obviously, from an MBA will be really helpful there. And the career resources to push you towards LDPs. A lot of M7 Business School career centers have relationships with Amazon Pathways recruiters, for example. In fact, at Oxford, one of the MBA career advisors used to be the recruiter for Amazon's Pathways program, for example. So using the career center to pivot into an LDP program is a really good use of an MBA. And so there you've got your career narrative. You start with a story, your realization, what you want to achieve, and how you need an MBA to achieve it.
All right. Okay, next question then. What do you think OP can do to improve?
Yeah. So the first thing is that racing thing. So OP is already on this, right? Is already leading this team, this virtual racing team. But I reckon this could be made bigger, very frankly, quite easily, right? Do they have a website? If not, make a sexy website with racing videos and, you know, flashing bits, and make a really nice website for the team so that if the adcoms search for it, they can find it. Make a LinkedIn page, maybe. Make a few posts. We're recruiting. We're interested in racing. Come and join us. Make a LinkedIn page. All this, just make it into a thing. I don't know whether you could even make a company out of it, right? Do you make an LLC racing team? I don't know. But if you did, you could maybe start charging your members a little bit of money, and all of a sudden you've got revenue. Like, turn it into a thing so that adcoms realize isn't just you playing in your underwear in your bedroom, right? It's a thing. So next, strengthening profile, researching LDPs. I mentioned Amazon. It's one of the good pathway. The Amazon Pathways program is one of the great LDPs that could be relevant, but there's loads of these. Lots and lots of engineering and manufacturing and real estate companies have leadership development programs that you should be looking into. Ideally, speak to people on those LDPs, learn what they're looking for, so that you can frame your application as saying, look, I've already started this research. Schools will love that. So that's the next thing. Finally, the introspection. As I mentioned before, engineers are not really known for the introspection, so you need to get started in that. Now, the slight advantage here that you've got is that if you, as an engineer, if you can do it well, it's an opportunity to stand out. And I could talk at length about what doing introspection well looks like, but I think OP best for that. If you want to talk about that, get in touch directly, and we'll do that offline, because I just don't know what you've got to introspect on. Okay, so I think that's everything.
All right, are we ready for our next profile?
Let's go.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this roast. Let me just jump in really quickly to plug Sam Weeks Consulting. We're a team of top MBA admissions consultants whose job it is to get you into the best business schools in the world. Head to samweeks.com to find out how we do it and to get in touch.
Profile 3, starting my MBA journey. 26 male, 4 years of experience, working advisory for an ultra high net worth registered investment advisor in San Francisco. Reed West Coast Portfolio Management. Academic background is in engineering with a 3.5 GPA from a top 20 school, was a D1 athlete and team captain for whatever that's worth, and also currently serve in the Army Reserves. Targeting GSB and Haas, as I have a strong preference to stay local, but also open to other programs with solid West Coast placement like HBS, Wharton, Kellogg, and Booth, looking to matriculate in fall 28. An MBA has been my exit plan since I joined. Hours and pay are nice, but the work is dull and repetitive. I can't see myself doing it anymore. My ideal use of an MBA would be to get into MBB and then pivot into the PE or VC ecosystems here in the Bay. I ultimately want to work in investing, but my investment exposure is too derivative right now to interest any funds. The project-based work of consulting is really appealing, and I love learning about business strategy. So, which consulting might give me exposure to? Please check me there. Please check him there, Sam, later. And obviously hinging my future on a half-baked scheme of top MBA to top consulting practice to which is one of the most desirable fields. It's not realistic in practice. OP knows that these doors don't fly open for anybody, and there are other outcomes that he would be happy with. But company has plenty of MBAs from top programs, and OP also has mentors who attended these institutions, so LORs won't be an issue. I see a few questions in there, but first, just from what I've read out, what do you think, Sam?
Okay, so profile evaluation here, 3.5 GPA, a smidge below the 3.6 average of these top schools, but not far off. Top 20 school, obviously a well-recognized brand, so not a bad start at all. And I think there was a mention of the GMAT GRE. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit on this and just include this in my evaluation. OP scored a 160, 155 on the GRE cold. That's very nice. Very nice, particularly the 160 quant is a good sign. Anyway, let's say that. So it sounds to me like OP academically is in a decent spot, although we've got a bit of work to do, but we're on the right track. I don't see any issues there. Professional. So within the finance sphere, lots of finance people applying to MBA programs, the investment advisory to high net worth is not something we see every day. We see investment bankers from bulge bracket banks, see them every day. People doing like loans to companies, commercial banking, etc. We see them every day. But this is not something we see every day. So there might be an angle there. Might be an angle. I don't see any detail of promotions or growth within that role. So hard to make an assessment of that, but obviously a promotion or two wouldn't do any harm either. So professional with a bit more detail I'd like to hear, but yeah, looks good. Demographic, no indication at all of demographic, I don't think. 26-year-old male, but that's all we know. So I'll skip that. Extracurriculars. Okay, D1 athlete. Yeah, for whatever it's worth. Yeah, it might form the basis of a leadership origin story or something, but it's not on its own going to make a big difference. Where I think the extracurriculars could get interesting is the currently serving the Army Reserves. That might lend itself to a nice HBS leadership story, for example. So decent extracurriculars, I'd say a small plus there for OP. Now, goals. For me, this is where this profile gets interesting because OP is saying, I want to use an MBA to get into MBB. Who doesn't, right? We hear that all the time, except this profile, this applicant does genuinely seem to be interested in the consulting process and learning about lots of different businesses. And that, to me, says, not everybody should put MBB as their goal, but some people can do it. And it's the people who are genuinely interested in consulting and can make the case for needing it in their career, not just drinking the Kool-Aid of, I want MBB on my resume. If that's you, think of a different goal because it's not going to wash. It's not going to work. But I think OP is not in that boat. I think OP genuinely likes this idea of the broad experience. And kind of the litmus test for this is, would you accept a management consulting role at a Big Four? Right? You'd be getting the breadth of exposure. You'd be getting all the training. You'd be getting paid reasonably. You haven't got the brand on your resume, are you still interested in consulting? If you are, you're probably on the right track. If you're not, you're hunting brands, and the adcom will see through that. So I get the sense that OP's quite the right kind of person, actually, to work in consulting, maybe. So particularly with the client-facing stuff from the high net worths, that I imagine OP has a very polished kind of client-facing demeanor, and that's something the consultancies will appreciate. So I'm quietly okay. I'm okay with those goals in the short term. The long-term pivot to VC, like, I see this so often. You've got to have your own in, basically. It could work. If your friend's working at a PE firm and has offered you an interview in 5 years' time, fine. If they haven't, probably not the best thing to say. Okay. So overall, a decent profile, albeit quite early in the process.
Okay. And then coming to OP's questions, a little background here. I did practice exams for both the GRE and the GMAT, scored 160, 160 quant, 155 verbal on the GRE, and a 575 with a dismal quant performance on the GMAT. My instinct is to go GMAT because I know I can improve a lot on math, and I did quite well in verbal, but GRE feels like the easier exam. Given the programs I'm aiming for, my work is cut out anyway. So which way do you think OP should go?
Yeah. So my general rule of thumb on this is take the test that you score in the higher percentile for. Don't worry about which one the schools prefer and all of this stuff. It's basically evens now. Focus on where do you score best. And if the GRE feels like an easier exam and you're scoring a 160, 155 cold, it does seem to me like that GRE suits you well. Lots of people struggle to get that score after months of tutoring. I'm leaning GRE here, seriously. And by the way, to build on that, speak to a GRE GMAT tutor who can, for example, Mario in our team does GMAT and GRE. He has diagnostics he can use to, cut to the chase and tell you which one you're better suited for. But my gut with this early information is GRE probably the right decision.
Okay. And question 2. My firm has a history of sending people in my role to top MBAs, and almost all of them used consultants. I like the idea of getting help from a pro, but the price tag is high. And I know that the military aspect of my profile can probably help me save some money here. But even if costs are taken off the table, what value did a consultant bring you?
Yeah, I'm biased, obviously, as an admissions consultant. So I'm actually going to sit out. I'm going to ignore that question. OP, if you're interested, get in touch directly and we'll talk about whether a consultant can help you specifically. The assumptions you're making there are broadly right around the military aspect of your profile can qualify you for scholarships and can bring the price tag down. It does also sound like you could use some guidance on your kind of career narrative. Somebody who has experience in those different industries guiding you towards the one that makes most sense to you. But I'm not going to get dragged into this now in a public setting. I'm biased. I think admissions consultants are awesome, but I would say that. So let's skip that question.
All right. Question 3 then. Like I mentioned earlier, I want to stay in the Bay post MBA, ideally for both professional and personal reasons. I'd rather not leave, but Haas and GSB are not famous for being safety schools. So I need to cast a wider net. My current impression of MBAs is that as you go further down the prestige, programs become increasingly regional in their job placement. Is this true?
So the short answer is yes. I basically think that with this profile, OP should be focusing on Haas. I can see Haas working out with everything that I know here. We need a decent GRE, fine, but decent 325 or so GRE score with this application, well crafted, I can see Haas working out. To be blunt, I don't see the kind of flair that I normally see for GSB. I don't see that here. Maybe it hasn't been mentioned, but my gut says GSB's out of reach. But Haas is well within reach, I think. Now, this point around the geographic piece, basically, yes, as you at the top of the rankings, the ability to go to a different part of the country or even the world, that door is more open. As you drop down the list, the network tends to be more concentrated around the business school itself. So yes, this is the right assumption. But I would honestly, given OP's focus on the Bay Area, I would just put Haas front and center of his focus. Probably remove GSB. Maybe throw the Hail Mary, right? Fine. But focus on Haas. Put everything into that with a few backups further down the list that are, decent M7 brands that can still open the door on the West Coast, but don't have that, local proximity. That's how I'd be approaching this.
Okay. And finally then, Sam, I want to ask you, what can OP do to improve his profile?
Yeah. Look, for me, the focus here is around that consulting goal. OP makes it sound like consulting genuinely is interesting to him. Well, he's going to need to prove that. It's all very well saying it. As I mentioned before, loads of people are putting consulting as their goals, and you risk just falling into a shit heap of applicants who are just, don't stand out. So how do you stand out if consulting is your goals? The big one is taking on experience that points towards a genuine consulting interest. For example, pro bono consulting. That could be joining a group, they're kind of like a non-profit, like a charity that you can join, and then you get posted to various other charities, various small businesses, whatever, to do pro bono consulting on behalf of that organization. IC-impact consulting are one, but there's a few of these around. Do your own due diligence and find one that you like. That then you can add to your resume, and that shows very, very concretely that you are genuinely interested in consulting, genuinely interested in how lots of different businesses work. Speaks volumes. That's one. The other is you can go out of your way to just directly consult for small businesses that you maybe know, maybe friends and family, etc., maybe the businesses in your neighborhood. Go and do pro bono engagements for them. Find a challenge that they're looking to focus on and help them with it for free or relatively cheap. For example, you've got a business around the corner, you've got a cafe around the corner that hasn't got a social media strategy at all, hasn't got any internet presence for that matter. So you go and digitize their business, and you turn them in, you add them to Google Maps, you start generating reviews, you put a QR code on the counter so that people can scan the QR code and leave a review, and create social media content and pages and all of this stuff, and generally go and create an online presence for that business. Now, if that business is something that interests you or is owned by maybe a veteran, for example, that you kind of vibe with, you can learn a shitload from that, but also you can add it to your resume. Pro bono consulted for local veteran-owned cafe, introduce social media marketing, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you sound like someone who's interested in consulting for businesses. Much more impactful than just saying, I'm interested. Right. So that's the biggie. The other things that OP can do to improve profile, obviously get that GRE. I'd like to see a 325, 6, 7 ballpark for Haas. I think if OP can get that into the mid to high 320s, Haas is really seriously on the table. And as I said before, honestly, I'm not seeing anything particularly unique for GSB, but the other M7s with a 326, 327 GRE, the other M7s are on the cards. And those brands are obviously well known enough to open doors on the West Coast that OP is looking for. Wharton have Trex, Booth have Trex. These schools have Trex and exposure and even campuses on the West Coast that you can benefit from. So hopefully that answers these questions.
Okay, I think that's everything for this profile.
Awesome. OP, I would just say, get in touch. I really like your vibe. I like your profile. I think you're in with a good chance. And yeah, I'd love to help you make that a reality.
Okay, next profile then.
Next profile.
Guidance.
Okay,
Some
guidance is what we're for.
yeah. About me, undergrad in economics USA, 27 male, a master's in quant finance from the USA again, GRE of 326, worked for 3 years in commercial real estate finance in the US. Extracurriculars, started a hedge fund club in college and authored a research paper about our trades. My aim is to lead investments, asset management across Europe and build my leadership, capital raising, and institutional investment skills. I'm currently looking at LBS, INSEAD, HEC, Oxbridge, and maybe Erasmus, Rotterdam. Would really appreciate some feedback there, Sam. What do you think?
Yeah, let's go academic first. No mention of GPA. It's often a little bit of a red flag, because if it was high, I think OP might have probably would have mentioned it. Yeah. On the other hand, has a master's in quant finance. So, and to get into programs like that, masters like that, you often need a decent GPA. So, I'm not sure. Obviously, GMAT, GPA pending. TBD. The GRE 326 is solid though. That's nice. That's 163, 163. Good GRE score. Academics look okay, but I don't know without the GPA. It's hard to say. So next, also we don't know the split. I would say if it's leaning quant, 166 quant, 160 verbal, for example, then that is a stronger GRE score than if it's leaning verbal. So TBD on the academics. Professional, commercial real estate, quite a common pre-MBA sector, and I'm not seeing much in the way of promotions. Maybe they're there, maybe OP just hasn't mentioned them. But so par for the course, I would say at this point so far. Demographic, all we know is 27-year-old male, we don't, American. We don't know any more than that. But I would say that at these programs in Europe, a solid 20-25% of the cohort will be American. So definitely, in a good position there. No worries demographic wise. Extracurriculars. I started a hedge fund club during college, and authored research paper. Generally, extracurriculars in undergrad don't count for as much. I've talked about this, and I don't see any more recent ones. But on the other hand, these extracurriculars do seem to fit into the narrative. So that helps potentially. So yeah, it would be nice if there were some extracurriculars that are more recent. OP we'll talk about that a bit afterwards, but that's potentially a bit of a gap. In terms of goals, this lead investment / asset management across Europe and build leadership, capital raising, institutional investment skills. This can work, but it can work particularly out of London. So we'll talk about the schools, but there isn't much you can do here in France, especially if you don't speak French. Ditto, you can work in Amsterdam and Rotterdam without speaking Dutch, but you're better off if you speak some Dutch. So I would be UK focused for these goals. Basically, the city and Canary Wharf are real hedge fund and real investment manager hubs, and LBS, Oxbridge have routes into those. So from a goals perspective, reasonable, but it will affect schools. Next, I would say, just one other thing on those goals, that they will appreciate your US experience. Having worked in finance in Europe, there is a solid respect for the US finance industry, including the US commercial real estate finance industry in the US. They will be open, employers, I should say, will be open to hiring you, assuming all the visa stuff works out. And the schools will know that. So all that to say, goals are reasonable. Decent chance at those schools, I would say. And I would also say a very focused profile. We've just done 3 or 4 other roasts where we've been talking about car racing and finance and all of this different stuff. OP's is just purely finance, and particularly real estate finance. And that narrowness could be potentially an issue, particularly because INSEAD and LBS and HEC and Oxbridge have very broad applications, lots and lots of essays required. And if you're a one-trick pony and all you can talk about is commercial real estate and investing, you can't reuse that content over and over again. You don't want every single essay to be about the same topic. So that could be a concern.
Okay. All right. So how do you think OP can then improve their profile for MBA applications?
So extracurriculars, showing them something that is recent and not purely finance related would broaden your profile a lot. And you can do that in the interests essays, you can do that in the resume, but yeah, that's going to matter. That's one. Two, broadening the profile out. Everything, as I said before, extracurriculars, work, goals are all completely investment centric. And that's a little bit concerning. Business schools do not want that. The people who've only got one thing about them. Frankly, you'd be really annoying to be with. If that's all you've got, you'd be really annoying to have in the cohort. You're not adding a breadth of diversification. And you're also potentially falling into the stereotype of the investment banker that has no life outside of work. So for all those reasons, not ideal for an application perspective. So broaden those out and yeah, widen your profile scope, particularly via extracurriculars, maybe also via goals. Backup goals might be interesting here. So if you have purely finance goals, you might also want to include some slightly more construction in real estate, for example, could broaden your story a little bit. If you've got some side interest in construction, you could use that in one of your essays and maybe have that as an alternative goal as a backup plan. So just something that broadens you and makes you a little bit more interesting than just finance bro.
That's all of our profiles for today, Sam.
Okay, excellent. I believe we have a bonus.
We do have a bonus. All right. Our bonus is quite interesting, this one. How I think about the financial costs of an MBA. I'm a soon-to-be second-year MBA at a T15 school. Even though I didn't achieve my post-MBA recruiting goal in the first semester, I'm still very happy that I pursued it. I have been thinking a lot about the costs of doing an MBA and whether it makes sense to invest so much. And I've come to the conclusion that it does. This is my rationale. First of all, lots of people see the MBA cost as this formula, which I think is wrong. MBA cost is equal to tuition plus living costs plus the salary that you forego. This is clearly wrong. You'd have living costs whether you did an MBA or not. You'd not keep all of your salary away. Your living cost shouldn't go into the formula unless you want to consider the marginal higher or lower cost of the new location. I think the MBA experience itself is worth some extra money, so it does not go into my formula. So now the formula is cost is tuition plus the salary of 2 years. Right? Next thing I'm thinking of is the salary bump. Most people have an average age of 28. That means 40 years of income ahead of you. I think even a decent bump after the MBA would be worth the investment. I asked Claude to build an interface where I can input my pre-MBA salary, required rate of return, and a post-MBA bump to see what is the break-even bump. It came to 40K. Considering I made only 80K before MBA, I think a 120K USD salary should be more than achievable for me after. I may be biased, but please feel free to poke holes in my logic. Do you see any holes in this logic?
I love it. I love it. Yeah? It's the most MBA-ish post ever. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is basically, I like the analysis. I want to take it another step forward. I want to build on it even more. There's some things I really like about it. For example, focusing on the after-tax salary of 2 years. This is absolutely right. A lot of people use gross salary, but 30%, half of that is going to the government. So forget that bit. It's the after-tax salary that matters. I really, really like this approach. So a couple of other ideas that I'd like to build on. One, don't forget internships. Don't forget internships. So OP doesn't mention, is basically in the summer now of between the first and second years. If you get an internship in that window, 2-month internship, typically take home, I don't know, 20K dollars in that window for an MBA internship at a competitive company, that already starts paying down some of your debt. So that's one. Some people even get a second internship, which might help even more. So internships is one that I would add in if we're going to get really granular about this formula. And you'd argue that those internships, that is additional. It's not probably as much as your salary that you're kind of foregoing, but it is a plus. So you should be added back in. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's no mention here of scholarships, I don't think, but scholarships dramatically adjust this return on income on investment calculation because the tuition number, which makes up a large part of the new calculation here, could drop by easily 30% with scholarships. We know from our clients that the average scholarship number, I'm just going to dig this out because we have it on our website as in our performance report. Just hold on just a moment. And by the way, we'll add a link to this in the bottom of this video and in the post. Average scholarship for our clients last year was 70,000 USD. So let's call that 35K per year. Take that off the tuition, and you're dropping this cost, this number here, by 70K. That makes a huge difference, not accounted for here, but very, very common. And people underappreciate how much scholarship money you can make with a good application. So that affects this a lot. I'd be curious whether OP had any. I don't think there's any mention of it here, so probably not. But if you start to take 30% off the cost, and makes an impact. So that's another thing I'd add. Next, living costs. OP makes the, I think, correct assumption that you'd have living costs whether or not you did an MBA or not. But I would add to that that the living costs as a student can be quite a lot lower than the living costs as a working professional. Now, not always, right? If you're living somewhere with a low cost of living and you move to New York for your MBA, fine. Your cost of living is going to go up. But lots of people, that's not the case. It could be the other way around. For example, I moved from London, where I lived in the city, to Oxford in the UK, where my cost of living dropped dramatically by a third, maybe. So that drop should definitely be included, and makes a nuanced change to this calculation. And then the other thing I'd add is trips. Now you see a lot, and people worry a lot about trips during an MBA program and the cost of these trips. Broadly, I would equate those to vacations, to holidays. When I lived in London, I went on holiday a couple of times a year. During my MBA, I went a couple of times a year on trips. Those more or less cancel each other out, I would argue. So that's another element to this that kind of plays into the cost of living piece. And then the other thing that I would say is this model doesn't account for the time in your life when you do an MBA. And I would argue that if you're going to use this model as a salary bump and multiply that extra 40K by the number of years of extra 40K per year, that makes the case that doing the MBA earlier counts for a lot. For example, if you have somebody who does the MBA after 4 years of work experience and somebody who does the MBA after 8 years of work experience, that's 4 years at 40K. It's 160 grand of value created by doing the MBA early. Just interesting way to think about this. It's sort of an interesting kind of conclusion that you can take away from this model. And then there's a few things that I'd add that are really difficult to quantify, but I'm going to try. The network. Everyone bangs on about how the network is a valuable part of the MBA. Well, how do you value that? Well, let's just say that in 5 years' time, you make a big career pivot, or you lose your job and you use your network to get a new job. Go from 0 to 100 grand salary because of your network, you could quantify that potentially. Let's say that happens twice in your career, twice going from 0 to 100 grand salary. You could put that into that Claude model. I don't know how you calculate it, but definitely Claude could probably calculate the value of that. And it's another factor. And then another thing is the broader perspective and the international friends. Now, some people would value that at $0. Other people would value that at a lot. And that's a personal thing and even more difficult to quantify. But I'm going to try. Let's say that you live in a high cost of living location and your MBA opens the door to a life in a cheaper city. Right? Maybe that's through your international friends. You discover a cheaper location, for example. That you can quantify. For example, I'm in Barcelona now, which is much cheaper than in London, where I was before the MBA. Let's say the house prices, just for round numbers, are half what they are in London. Now that I can quantify. That value of. I now can buy a house for X when the same house in London costs 2X. And you have a value to that. So there's a lot of other things I'd like to add in this model. And if I was building this with Claude, and I'm not going to do it, but if I was going to build this model with Claude, I would include some of those interesting factors that build on it. But I really like the way OP's tackling this.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting comment section as well.
What are we seeing?
A lot of people agreeing, for example, sound logic. People haven't really accounted for a lot of these things, and it's not really something that we do see when we discuss the costs of an MBA.
Yeah.
So I think, this is a very fresh perspective.
Somebody here saying internship and bonuses. That's a really good point. Bonuses when you sign a full-time offer, 20, 30, 40 grand is not uncommon. So that helps. That brings that eats into the tuition. And then I would add that, somebody's talking about the cost of living, moving from a low cost of living area to a higher cost of living area. That's interesting. There's a few deleted comments removed by the moderator. Somebody's saying conservative. The monetary cost of the MBA is changing my wealth. During the MBA, I spent blah, blah, blah. Yeah, now there's this interesting opening up this idea of a 1-year MBA, which changes the math again. If you can get a 40K salary boost from a 1-year MBA, right, 120 grand, let's say, with a 30% scholarship, that knocks off 40. So 80K investment gets a 40K boost. You paid it off in 2 years. It's really, really interesting way to think about it. So interesting post. I like it. That is one of the great things about Reddit. I love when people just dump their ideas like this and get picked apart. But I think in this case, very, very sound logic.
Yeah, that's all of our profiles and bonus for today, Sam. Thank you.
Awesome. Mal, thank you very much as always. If you've enjoyed this roast, get in touch, send us your profile. If you're applying in round 1 or 2 of this year, get in touch. We're currently taking on round 2 applicants for the January deadlines in particular. And we'll have to talk more about your profile. Roast you later.